Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for listening. And you know, at the FemiNinja Project, we are all about empowerment, and today's guest empowers women to get beyond their doubts and fears to fully express their gifts and talents to serve others. Her name is Debra Valentina. She is the founder of Creativing. She's also a holistic intuitive coach for women executives and entrepreneurs, and an inspirational speaker, as well as a published author who recently published her third book. So, Debra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
And we are delighted to have you. And as I'm reading your introduction, I'm going, wow, you sure are a powerhouse, aren't you?
Well, thank you. I think I am. So, yes, I've done tons and tons and tons of things. I've been in business for over 34 years. So I guess that in and of itself would say I'm a powerhouse.
Right. Anybody who could stay in business that long and still keep their sanity is quite impressive.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But after talking with you the first time a few weeks ago, what I was so impressed with your ability to focus. You really have a way of making your mind up about what you are going to do, what you want to do, and finding a way to go after it.
Well, thank you for picking that up, because I believe that is one of my superpowers, actually, is to be clear about my priorities and then focus on them. And so I really, actually often share with my clients about what I call attention particles. And all of us only have a certain amount of attention particles in any given day, week, month, year. And we don't want to fritter those away. We want to be very clear about how we're using them. So I've been actually practicing for probably over 20 years in terms of being clear about where my attention particles are going. And I find it very, very helpful for my clients because they've never even thought about it that way.
Right. I never thought about it that way, but it makes total sense. When you came across this idea 20 years ago and started using it, was it something that just woke you up in the middle of the night and said, this is what all my attention goes to and the energy that it takes? Or was it a gradual kind of organic awakening?
Well, I first heard about attention particles through a course called Avatar, which is a course, an empowerment course out of Florida. And, you go to different levels. There's the Avatar level, the master level, and the wizard level. And by the time, and I am at the wizard level, at the time you get to the wizard level, you have practiced this concept for years. And that's how, and when I say, it might be longer than that because I actually did the Avatar Master course in 1995. So, I think my math is off with it is over 20 years, but well over that, actually.
You actually started this journey of lifelong learning when you were really young.
Absolutely. I would say that I was actively, I was a late teen, early 20s when I would say that, some would call it a spiritual journey. That's what I call it. It is lifelong learning. And I was chuckling because the other day I noticed that I was on 3 online courses, a book marketing class, a public board training for women, and a spirituality class from Mind Valley. And I'm like, okay, and I'm doing all of that on top of, what what I do, which is, you've already named, but is coaching, inspirational speaking, and is writing what I call self-evolvement books. And yet it flows so that none of this feels like work. I'm in the flow with it. So none of it appears as work for me.
Well, that's when you know you're on the right track and doing the right thing, when everything falls into place and feels effortless rather than beating your head up against a brick wall.
Oh, yes, yes. And, I have in my life done the beating my head against the wall, and I no longer, what I say, and I'm not the first to say it, but suffering is optional. Pain will go through in our lives, but suffering is optional. And so I just don't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. I mean, we all have times in our lives that we really go through some rough times. I mean, we all do. It's just part of life. And how we come out of it or walk through it really determines actually how healthy we're going to be on the other side.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
But I love the fact that you said you were studying at the same time a spirituality course, a book marketing course, and then the board training course. And it was like, wow, that's quite the trifecta. You've got kind of like, three extremely different subjects or topics or levels of energy kind of that you're dealing with. But it just wraps into each other so beautifully.
Yes, and it's actually one of the things that I think keeps me young, and that is I'm curious about so many things, and I need variety. I definitely need variety. I find that most of the clients, nearly all of the clients I work with, who are experienced, wise, conscious, professional women, who are so bright that they need variety. They, they get bored easily. And so, I'm a big proponent. It's interesting. There's focus, which you mentioned earlier, and then there's variety. And I usually, for myself and also suggest for my clients, that there be kind of three major things they're focusing on at a time. And yet that can change quickly. You can complete with one and add another one on. So surprisingly, focus and variety can work well together.
Well, I think, like you said, we get bored, or some of us do. And I'm one of those people that will get easily bored if I don't have several different things to work on that kind of complement each other, but are a little bit different as well. And it's just the variety keeps your brain really active and kind of lights up your nervous system. And that is what, like you said, keeps you young. It keeps you youthful. It keeps you energized. It keeps you interested in everything that's going on around you, even if you don't like it.
Yeah, we would all rather be stimulated by what we prefer. So it's really, again, important for you to distinguish what things you want to focus on and make sure that they're things that light you up, that are blissful, that the words that I love, and are part of the title of my book is freedom and joy. So you want to look for things that give you a sense of freedom and provide joy in your life.
And I want you to tell us more about the book, but first I really want to hear a little bit more about your coaching business, because I kind of glossed over it in the introduction, just said, what you did. But I'm really curious and interested how you came to be a holistic coach for women, especially at the executive level and entrepreneurship. So if you can give us some background about how that transition occurred, or that transformation, where you started from to where you are right now.
Well, I like the question, and I'm like thinking, okay, so do the short version, Debra, do the short version.
Well, okay, let me tell you this. So if you do the long version, that's no problem, because if we run out of time, we'll just continue this conversation in another episode. So don't be pressured.
Okay, very good, Cheryl. So I I am trained as a healthcare executive. I have a master's of healthcare administration from Berkeley, and then also did postgraduate work at Stanford University for international business. And so I'm trained as a healthcare executive, and that is what I did for the first part of my career. And at the height of my healthcare career, I was working for Kaiser Permanente, which many people have heard of, and I was responsible for three states. I was the chief operating officer, and it had been my dream to do that. I was in the hospital when I was 3, and really remembered I wanted to have a better healthcare system. It sounds crazy, and yet I did decide back at that young age. And so when I reached my dream in my early 30s, I was so disappointed because it really wasn't giving me as much joy and fulfillment as I thought it would. And so soon after that, I went off on my own and had a healthcare consulting practice. And I would consult with, usually it was the C-suite, mainly either the chief executive officer or the chief operating officer. And what I would find, and this is actually how I became a coach, is they would ask, some after I was complete, that they didn't really have a particular next project, but they wanted to use me as a sounding board, and could they pay me a sounding board? And of course I was, hell yes. Yes, you can.
We never say no to can we pay you? The answer is usually yes.
Exactly. And so that is how I started. And way back when there's a gazillion coaching trainings. Back then there was one that I knew of called Transformational Technologies Coaching Training, which is what I took to supplement just what came natural to me as a sounding board, as a coach. And then what I found was who was attracted to me was women executives in a high level in healthcare organizations, and still about 50% of my clients are in that category. And what the one last piece to share for now is that when I got behind closed doors, they didn't want to just talk about work. They wanted to talk about everything else, including work, their personal lives and what was working and relationships and health and all of it, because I find that most women, if not all women, are holistic in their thinking. And so several years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, instead of calling myself an executive and entrepreneurial coach, I changed it to holistic coach, because that's really what happens.
Yeah, it sounds a lot more complete. It sounds a lot more like you're looking at the person as a whole, not just the executive piece or the entrepreneurial piece. It's you can't just cut the body up or the person into different pieces.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, and there's studies on this, but men are actually better at what's called compartmentalizing, where they single focused, and women are not so much. And I find that really delightful and refreshing, and it's how I think. And one, everything bleeds into the other. So it is a holistic approach. So thank you for picking that up.
So when you work with a client, how does it begin? What does that look like?
Great question. So, what it looks like is I give my clients an opportunity to come up with what I call 3 juicy intentions. Because if you don't know where you want to go, then you don't know if you got there or not,
Mhm.
is how I say it. And so you start with an intention, and an intention I find is more powerful than goals. Goals is, of course, in the corporate world is a bigger word, but intentions are what you want and are broad enough that you can essentially release it to the universe. And as I say it, the universe's job is to figure out, or at least co-create the how with you. And so the 3 juicy intentions you must have, and people have some people have a hard time with intentions. It's an I statement, an active verb, and then uh, so an example would be. I experience freedom and joy, since I've talked about it so much in our call already. So I experience freedom and joy is an intention. And so that's a really good one, because when you release it to the universe can, cook up all kinds of ways for you to have freedom and joy that you may not ever have thought of. So there's the intentions, and then depending on what those intentions are, we usually, at least at the beginning, work weekly or bi-weekly. And I always give what I call home play,
Mhm.
which is practices during the 1 or 2 weeks in between the sessions, so that you're actively working towards that. And I also have all my clients sign an agreement, and they're agreeing to the fact that they will do this home play.
Mhm. And I notice you call it home play, not
Yes.
homework. And I know that is, to go back to your previous word that you used, intention. You do that intentionally.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's thank you for picking that up. And it's amazing the mindset difference that makes between homework and home play, because
Mhm.
there's lots of people have, a negative connotation with homework that, they hated to do when they were in grade school or high school. I did not have that. I loved homework, so I didn't have that. But not everyone was was into working so hard in grade school and high school.
I
Um,
just want to interrupt you for 1 minute because I can't
sure.
help myself. You truly were like a maniac when it came to schoolwork and homework, and I have never in my entire life met anybody that was quite that passionate about it when they were young.
Oh wow. Well, thank you for saying that. I think part of it was a positive reason. I think part of it was a negative reason, in that I was trying to prove my worthiness.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was a little bit of a mixed bag. And nonetheless, I really, really did enjoy the homework. And I'm just chuckling, and always did more than was assigned. And, again, I think part of the proving the worthiness part. And it did me well, because I was able to, study at Berkeley and Stanford.
But you were one of those people that made me look even worse for daydreaming and looking out the window and wishing I was somewhere else. But that's all right. I forgive you for it.
Okay, good. I'm so glad, Cheryl.
Something else I wanted to point out as you were talking about goals versus intentions, because even when I hear that word goals, I just kind of go, ooh, I shrink away a little bit, same as I would with homework. But to me, when I hear that word goals, especially when you're talking about it, it's almost like goals has no heart and no soul. And intentions really comes with a life of its own. Does that make
Ah,
sense?
yes, yes. And so, absolutely beautifully said. And Goals has masculine energy, a doing energy, and intentions has a feminine energy associated with it, or a being energy. So it's very, very different energetics associated with those two words.
Which is really important to recognize, because I think sometimes we all want to be, if we're hard driven, especially, a powerful woman in a powerful position, it's almost like you're trying to be like the men, and we're definitely not. And I don't even think that that's what the guys that you're working with want to see, is a woman coming in trying to be another man.
Well, it has changed. This is a whole subject that I love, and I will just say this about it. Part of the reason that I was so, frankly, miserable when I reached my goal of being the chief operating officer, the youngest one ever in Kaiser.
Wow.
And the reason I was so miserable is that I had what I would describe as so much doing male energy running through my system. It was not a natural state of being. And so there was a huge gap between, what I call my natural resting place between masculine and feminine energy and what I was doing. So I probably, if you put percentages on it, I would say that I was running about 90% masculine energy and 10% feminine energy, where my natural state is actually 65% feminine and 35% masculine. So there was a huge gap, and no wonder I was not happy.
Well, I was wondering too, did it affect your physical health? Yeah, I would imagine that it would.
It absolutely did. And a healer who was also had psychic abilities scared me by saying, and I'm glad that she did, scared me by saying, you're on the way to having cancer.
Oh.
And I said, no can do. Will not do that. So that was part of the reason for quickly going out on my own.
And tell us again what age you were about at that point.
I was young. So it would have been 33. I would have been 33.
Now, that would be an age where a lot of women would, shrink from doing that and be absolutely terrified to go out on their own.
I don't know where I got my courage, and yet it was, I'm not happy. I need to do something else, and I'm going to do something else. And I do remember that what I did is I got a client, a healthcare consulting client, before I quit, as I asked the universe for a sign that this was a good path to go.
Wow. I'm thinking back on a lot of the other things that, you've told me along the way. And one thing I did want you to talk about is, of course, you have just published your third book.
Yes.
Beyond Chaos. And even as I was reading your book and thinking about the title, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, from chaos comes clarity. Not always, but sometimes.
Oh, I love that. Because that's exactly what did happen. So can I just launch into a little bit about my book?
That's what I was hoping for.
Okay, great. So Beyond Chaos, Journey to Freedom and Joy is really my vulnerable memoir about growing up in a highly dysfunctional family. I know that I'm not the only one that grew up in a highly dysfunctional family. And it's about my journey to grow beyond this adversity into a contributing life of freedom and joy. And the contrast between what was in my family of origin and how I experience life now is so dramatically different. And I am so grateful that I had the clarity, the courage, the wherewithal to go on my spiritual journey so that I could create something different.
And tell us again when you started the spiritual journey.
Yeah, it was in my late teens, early 20s. And I would say one of the, in addition to doing yoga and things that people were, rarely doing, rarely doing at that time, I also, there's a organization called Landmark Education. And I did the S training and the forum and all of the continuing courses with them, and actually became a introduction to the forum leader and enrolled tons of people into it because I believed in it so much. And so I was involved with Landmark Education for 10 years, like from 1980 to 1990. The organization is still going and has reinvented itself as I have over the years. So going back to my book just for a moment, at the end of my book, I actually have a number of contemplation questions where if readers are inspired to, they can explore what I call the 7 magical attributes on the journey to freedom and joy. And I've created a 90-minute masterclass on these 7 attributes that actually I'm offering as a gift to our audience today.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can I so those who are interested can contact me via beyondchaosbook.com for details, and I'll respond right away.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's beyondchaosbook.com. And I'm very excited. I've been in April, did some classes that were sort of the beta test, and it was amazing what people really got out of it. I was so happy, because I just made it, just made it up, and it worked.
But once again, you just made it up. It was effortless. You went with the flow, and look at how successful it was. And that's how you know you're on the right track. I said that before. It's like if you're, beating yourself up against the wall or running yourself into the ground and nothing's happening, you might want to try a different path. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm really, really glad that I added those contemplation questions. It was a last-minute add to my book, my publisher. And I didn't self-publish, so it's published, my book was published by Right Path Publishing, a small publisher on Kauai, Hawaii. But she was asking me if I wanted to add anything, and that just came to me.
Okay, so here we are. We're both in Colorado right now. You're actually fairly new to Colorado, and you're talking about Kauai, and how you got a publisher in Kauai is because you lived there for quite a while, didn't you?
I did. I lived there for almost 5 years, and people call it paradise, and it absolutely is paradise. And lots of people, in fact, most people, when I say that's where I came from, because I've been in Colorado for about 18 months now, and people say, why did you leave Kauai? And I left Kauai because I have more to do. I've got more to contribute, and it's really challenging to do that from a Pacific island, right in the middle of the ocean. So that's the simplest answer I have. It's the truth.
Okay. And the other thing I just wanted to go back to, because you've used the word a few times, and it's something that I hear in your voice. I see it in your face when I saw you on the video a little bit earlier, when you talked about joy, and you just truly are a joyful person. It's really amazing. And I know your history because, of course, I read your book. And to come to this point of freedom and joy is absolutely, for me, exhilarating to see. It just gives me so much hope and encouragement, because I've always said that we can heal from anything as long as we have the right environment, support system, the right tools, And we don't see that when we're really going through the dark times. All we see is just trying to get through that dark tunnel and get to the other side.
You've said so much in all of that. First, thank you so much for the acknowledgement, and I got goosebumps all over my body when you were talking. So thank you so much for that acknowledgement. And yes, and it's interesting about, resources and tools, because even at a young age, I was clear that my family was not doing well. I mean, I had the wherewithal, the intelligence to know that. And so I would find outlets. One of the outlets was I found a best friend who was an only child. And so her family adopted me, and I would get to go on all these fabulous vacations with her family and be able to leave my dysfunction behind for a little while. And I don't know, I just found all kinds of outlets. I was, and I'm sure that had to do with curiosity, which is one of the 7 magical attributes that I talked about. And the other one was optimism. And I'm really not quite sure. It feels like I kind of came out of the womb with optimism, but I can reframe or find a silver lining in just about anything.
Now that is a skill.
And so my clients really appreciate that one, because they're down in the dumps about something, and I can always, most always, find a silver lining.
So one other thing I wanted to bring up, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, that's fine. You actually kind of had to disconnect from your family unit.
I did. And that is not particularly a popular thing in mass consciousness. But it was one of the best decisions I ever made for myself, because it was just not serving me. My parents have since passed on, but I have 3 sisters, and what I do is I love them, and I send them love energetically when I think of them. And that's how I cope with that. But in order for me to not be in a toxic or blaming situation, I needed to disengage. So, yeah. Didn't expect that one to be coming up, but I'm more than happy to answer that. It's in my, it's in my book, and that's part of the vulnerability.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason why I brought it up is because it does take a tremendous amount of courage to do that.
I believe so. It's not the norm. It's not what most people would say is okay. And yet what I do is I always go to my inner truth. And my inner truth was, this is the best thing for me. So it does, and it, not just about this subject, but for everyone to, be centered and to look introspectively. Probably one of the biggest and most important questions is, what is my truth?
Mm-hmm. Well, especially when it comes to relationships, because they can be incredibly toxic and destructive. And I even did one of my first episodes about breaking up with my best friend. And we had been BFFs for 30 years. And it was like, how do you break up with somebody that you've been best friends with for 30 years that you haven't liked for the past 15 and you've been trying to break up with for the past 10? And it was really just taking a toll on my mental, physical, and emotional health. It was just exhausting because she had turned to the dark side, and it was a slow burn, but it was just absolutely, it was wearing me out, and it was just making me sick, literally. And I finally had to just break up with her.
Yes. And I would just say, I was actually having this conversation with one of my BFFs who's still on Kauai. And, with all of this curiosity and lifelong learning and commitment to growth, I grow very, very quickly. And many people, do, and some people prefer a slower, a slower route. For some reason, I'm in a hurry to grow, and so I do quickly. The reason I'm bringing that up is that, I have some lifelong friends, and I have lots of friends who are friends for a season, if you will, and then they really go out of my life, or I not in as much contact, and they sort of eventually drop off with grace. And I find that I go through that cycle quite often, and probably more often than most. And it's not an easy one at all. And yet what I know is my next friends are on their way, and that it always happens. I'm making room for those who are next to come into my life.
It's like pruning a tree.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. Yes.
The new growth can come, or, deadheading your garden or something like that, because when you get rid of the plants or the blossoms or whatever that aren't healthy and is just draining the rest of the plant, it's time to kind of make them go away, or let them go away.
Yes, and what I have, is my intention. Back to intentions. My intention is always to do it with grace and ease, and not have it icky sticky. And so I've gotten better and better at that. So I'm happy about that.
There's one other thing I'm curious about.
Yes.
And that is your first book. But if I remember correctly, you actually were starting your first book or writing it when you were in the second grade?
Oh, I love that. Two things that you kind of collapsed, and I'll uncollapse them for you.
Okay.
First is that I started writing in second grade. Absolutely. I started writing every day, actually, in second grade. And back then they were called diaries.
Right.
Now they're called journals. But yes, I had, up until I left Kauai, every diary/journal I'd ever written. I got a message from what I call my knowingness, that I had integrated everything in the journals, and I didn't need them anymore. So I actually had a bonfire on Kauai that lasted hours and hours and hours to release those journals. That was one piece. My first book is called Heart Ignited, Living a Fully Expressed Life. So Heart Ignited, Living a Fully Expressed Life. And that I was published by a small publisher out of Seattle in 2009, so about 11 years ago. One of the reasons I started writing in second grade was I had a clear thought that I would be writing my memoir, which I did do, and was, of course, published just a few months ago in March. And my sense is I know I have tons more stories, so there's more to come. It's not finished yet.
Right. It's never really finished, is it?
No.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us today? Any, like sparks of wisdom? I mean, you've certainly given us a lot, or anything else that you wanted to share with us?
Oh, wow. We have had quite the conversation. I'm very excited about this. I think that I would like to leave our audience with the top 3 lessons that I've learned in growing my business. And the first is that cultivating trusting relationships has been the key to growing my business. Absolutely, bar none. Cultivating trusting relationships. The other thing that I know is that serving others is the highest priority for me in my business, and that has served me well by serving others well. And then that integrity, the third thing, that integrity is the most important attribute that I can model. And it helps for people to trust me and to trust what I offer. So yeah, cultivating trusting relationships, serving others, and integrity would be things that I would love to leave the audience with in terms of growing their business if they have one, or even growing their career.
Okay. Even personal relationships, just what you're talking about, can be applied to almost every aspect of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just do want to remind everybody about the masterclass. It is beyondchaosbook.com. And how can people find you?
My website is creativing.info. So that's creativing.info. creativing.info. And you can also, of course, find me through beyondchaosbook.com, although that's just focused on the book. The creativing.info has probably anything and everything you would ever want to know about me is on my website.
It's a beautiful website. I've been on it. It's lovely, and it has a lot of great information.
Thank you so much.
Well, Debra, thank you so much for being here today. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your time and your voice with us. It's just been fantastic having you on the show.
Well, I have been totally thrilled with our conversation, and we covered many more topics than I ever imagined, and I'm so happy for that. Thank you again.
Good. I just really like my audience to get to know my guests, who they are, how they think, and what's going on with their lives, so they can apply some of these lessons to their own lives as well.
Perfect.
So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And just remember to set your intentions instead of your goals. When you want to achieve something, do your home play, not homework. And if you need any help, you need some guidance, please give Debra a call, check out her website, contact her, and she can help you out, because that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.